year 2025 was a tough one. The worst is yet to come. That's the mood with which the vast majority of Russians are heading into the New Year holidays. At the end of the year, sociologists also sum things up, and their findings are strikingly different from what the Russian dictator proclaimed at his year-end press conference. How are the drawn-out war against Ukraine and its economic consequences affecting Russians? And at whose expense and at what cost does the Kremlin plan to continue its aggressive war? Let's figure it out. What was the point of all this? That's probably the main question Russians ask themselves after Putin's year-end press conference. 4.5 hours live on air, dozens of guests in the studio, live feeds from different regions. And yet every single question was pre-approved down to the last comma. Putin talked a lot about Russia's successes, military, economic, and technological. But as polls show, citizens of the Federation haven't felt any of these successes themselves. If anything, it's quite the opposite. And even when it came to his usual promises to help or make life easier for his fellow citizens, Putin was stingy this time.
64% of citizens gave a negative assessment of 2025 for the country. 49% of Russians described the outgoing year as rather difficult, and another 15% called it bad or very hard. Only 29% of respondents gave a positive assessment. At the same time, just 5% consider the year to have been very successful. Another 7% found it hard to answer. It's worth noting that the view that the year was rather tough for Russia has prevailed for the past several years. From the results of a survey by the All-Russian Center for the Study of Public Opinion.
In 2026, the economic situation in Russia could significantly worsen. This was reported by the reputable publication The Washington Post. Experts warn of the risks of defaults and a possible banking crisis in the coming months. In addition, starting from January next year, Russia will join the group of countries with the highest VAT rates in the world. The value-added tax for Russians is being raised from 20% to 22%. Moreover, under the new rules, companies with revenues starting at 10 million rubles will become VAT payers. According to experts, it is in 2026 that the consequences of the war will begin to have a truly systemic and critical impact on the Russian economy.
Putin has spent a significant portion of the financial reserves and borrowed funds that previously covered military expenses. And ahead lie new financial challenges. The Russian economy is frozen and highly unstable. The closest analogy is a car idling in neutral. The engine is overheating and the car is moving neither forward nor backward. But the longer it sits, the more damage built up under the hood. From publications by the Washington Post.
The new tough U.S. sanctions against Russia's oil sector are increasing pressure on the country's budget and creating additional risks for its entire financial system. Due to the cessation of cooperation between international companies and Rosneft and Lukoil, Russia, according to experts, will lose at least $50 billion annually. And against this backdrop, Putin publicly boasted about the strengthening of the ruble by almost 45%, calling it nearly a record for the past 3 decades. However, as economists point out, this happened, first of all, because of the drop in demand for foreign currency in Russia, and secondly, due to the strict policy of the central bank. And in the near future, this will only increase the imbalance in the already weakened financial system.
An overvalued ruble reduces the competitiveness of the economy. Russia is effectively losing its natural advantages as an energy power, offering foreign consumers better terms than domestic producers. This also worsens the country's investment appeal and creates additional risks for economic development. If current trends continue, the strengthening of the ruble, combined with unfavorable lending conditions and a cooling economy, could soon lead to stagflation. From Bloomberg Agency Publications.
According to Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service, the total profit of Russian enterprises for the first 10 months of 2025 decreased by 8.3%. In the coal industry, losses are measured in hundreds of billions of rubles, and 2/3 of businesses are already operating at a loss. There are no new sources of revenue. Inflation is off the charts. The state treasury is sinking deeper into debt dependency. At the same time, the number of complaints about labor rights violations is growing exponentially. According to Rosstat, by early December, the number of such complaints exceeded 70,000, which is 1.5 times more than last year.
The largest increase was recorded in the category of complaints about delayed wages, more than 26,000 cases, which is 60% more than a year ago. At the same time, the number of claims about unlawful dismissals rose by 33%. Wage arrears have become one of the key trends of the year. By the end of October, the total debt had reached 2,200 million rubles, increasing by almost 11% in just 1 month. From a statement on the website of the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine.
Videos with such complaints, whether addressed to Putin or the investigative committee, are appearing en masse on social media. The problem is especially acute in the territories of Ukraine occupied by the Russian army. The occupation authorities have taken the practice of expropriating housing to the federal level. At the same time, not a single systemic problem has been resolved. For example, in Berdyansk, which is occupied by Russia, contractors from Yaroslav embezzled millions of rubles during the repair of a pumping station. Meanwhile, local residents never got any water. Water is supplied according to a schedule, once every 2 days, and the workers who did 3 shifts haven't been paid a single penny.
For the work we did in September and October of 2025, we haven't received the wages we earned. They kept promising us that we'd be paid by December. Today is already the 20th of December, and there's still no money. We literally have nothing to support our families with. Unfortunately, we're not getting any answers to our questions. It feels like we're simply being ignored. And among us are families with many children, including my own family.
Putin is waging war against Ukraine, mainly at the expense of people from poor and depressed regions, as well as mostly members of ethnic minorities. That's the conclusion reached by British intelligence. According to intelligence agencies, both the elite and residents of major cities rarely take part in combat operations. They make up a disproportionately small share among military personnel, and consequently among the casualties. In this way, the Kremlin is essentially shifting the main burden of the war onto the poorest and most socially vulnerable segments of the country's population.
Less than 1% of Russian government officials have relatives who participated in Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. By recruiting new soldiers in poor regions, often populated mainly by ethnic minorities, the Russian authorities can more effectively use financial incentives, while at the same time limiting the impact of mobilization on the urban segments of the Russian population with greater political influence, according to the British intelligence report.
The results of the outgoing year reveal a sharp divide between the Kremlin's official rhetoric and the real public sentiment in Russia. While Putin boasts about successes, Russians complain about falling incomes, rising taxes, delayed wages, and a deepening economic crisis. The economy of the Russian Federation is entering 2026 weakened, with depleted reserves, under the pressure of sanctions, and facing the threat of systemic failures. At the same time, it is the poor regions of the country and the most vulnerable social groups who continue to pay the enormous price of the war against Ukraine, while the Russian elite remains on the sidelines.
Subscribe to The Gaze and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.